Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
One of the largest private investments in a First Nations enterprise in Canada.
6,000 suites in 11 towers. The Squamish Nation has a massive plan for some valuable land in the center of Vancouver. Also,
I'd like to give a round of applause for our bus drivers.
Hoping for a deal. TransLink CEO encourages drivers and management to find an agreement as the transit dispute drags on. And
It's you who said quad. You suck.
We have a panic button.
It's exhausting.
under threat. MPs say they and their staff are facing more online abuse and have to take their own precautions.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Anita and Mike are away tonight. It is a massive development that will bring thousands more people into Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. The Squamish Nation's new development near the Burrard Street Bridge doesn't need city approval, but as Leanne Young reports, the mayor is a big fan.
This area of Kits is slated for major change.
The total cost of the investment within the whole project is around $3 billion, which will make it one of the largest private investments in a First Nations enterprise in Canada and definitely the world.
Groundbreaking plans by the Squamish First Nation. 6,000 units, 11 towers, flanking the south end of the Burrard Street Bridge. Back in the spring, the initial proposal for this 4.7 hectare area was for 3,000 units.
When we started getting through the design phase, we realized that with some of the transportation opportunities and where its proximity is to downtown, we could actually accommodate a denser development on the site.
Even though the city has no jurisdiction over reserve land, Vancouver's mayor sees grand potential for rental housing.
I'm very supportive of this project. I'm thrilled about this. Very good news, and I'll do everything I can to help move it forward.
Approximately 70% of it will be rentals, the rest sold as leaseholds. Band members will have below-market housing, possibly subsidized, but no guarantees yet for everyone else.
It's largely intended to be market rental, but we're looking at some affordability amounts in terms of number of units and rates, depending on a number of factors like the market, how much density we put on the land, financing, and things like that.
For people who live and play nearby, the increased density has raised questions, but it doesn't mean they're opposed.
It's going to make it very populated. And for the people, who are used to this green space, but on the other hand, maybe people need a place to live.
6,000 seems a little bit excessive. I think it was like 3,000 initially, wasn't it? So there's obviously pushing for high density, which obviously the city needs. So in that respect, it's pretty good.
It just seems like a lot of people. That's the size of a small town. I'm not down on them developing their land. I just hope that the transit is looked into.
Infrastructure issues like transit, community centers, and sewage are the only places where the city does have a say. All things the mayor says he's talking to the nation about weekly.
Before any of this can be developed so it looks a little bit more like this, it still has to undergo one more hurdle, a vote. The more than 3,000 members of the Squamish Nation will decide on December 10th. Leanne Young, CBC News, Vancouver.
Hearing the loud bang of fireworks on Halloween is legally coming to an end in Vancouver. This afternoon, City Council voted in favor of banning the sale and use of consumer fireworks in this city. Our Mira Baines is at City Hall and joins us live. Mira, what was the vote?
Well, Dan, Vancouver City Council voted 7-3 to get the process started for a ban on fireworks, for the personal sale of fireworks, as well as the use of fireworks in the city of Vancouver by 2021. And now Vancouver City Councilors say that they've had an overwhelming response from the public, and they've had time to ponder how they're going to vote over the Halloween period. And so they voted today 7-3 to get that process going. A final vote still has to take place, but this debate took a lot of time and took a lot of consideration, and Vancouver councillors say that they considered whether it would make the city a no-fun city or whether it would make it a safer city. Mayor Kennedy Stewart voted against the ban. He says that he associates fireworks with fun. Green Party councillor Pete Fry tabled the motion, and he says that fireworks can be harmful for pets and people.
It may be no fun for people who want to shoot off fireworks, but at the same time, it's no fun for people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, children with neurodivergence and autism. for veterans, for people fleeing war-torn regions, for people who have pets that are absolutely spooked and traumatized by fireworks every year. If we have sort of sanctioned community events where a proper permit's applied for and there's a specific date, time, and location that the fireworks are going to be set off, then people can anticipate it.
During the public hearing last month, we had also heard from a lot of fireworks advocates and retailers who say that this would just drive the sale of fireworks underground. They say that fireworks are readily available on Craigslist and that buying from a retailer actually adds a safety aspect to the sale of fireworks. I want you to take a listen to what a fireworks advocate had to say after the decision today.
We're very upset with this outcome. CNFA has worked really hard in the city of Vancouver for many years, working with the fire department and police department to promote safety in the sale and use of consumer fireworks. Right now with this ban, what they're putting in, we now don't have the ability to educate the public. This ban won't eliminate the use of fireworks.
And so fireworks advocates are saying that people should be putting pressure on city councillors ahead of a final vote on this, which is still several months away. I also spoke to Vancouver Fire Services, who says that fireworks actually causes about $400,000 of damage per year. And they said over this Halloween period, they could attribute about 20 structural fires to the use of fireworks. Dan?
Thank you, Mira. Mira Baines reporting live from City Hall tonight. The future of one of Vancouver's public golf courses is going to be debated in the next year. Last night, the Park Board passed a motion exploring unrealized benefits of Park Board land used for golf. The motion says there will be public consultation around alternative park and recreation uses for Langara Golf Course, which is right next to the Canada line on Cambie. The city owns 3 golf courses and 3 pitch and putts. And in other land news, City Council has approved the rezoning application for the site of the new St. Paul's Hospital. The approval enables Providence Healthcare to move forward with plans for a new health campus in the False Creek Flats area. That will include a nearly 600-bed acute care hospital, an outpatient center, a research facility, public plaza, and many more amenities. Now, this is expected to open in 2026. The new hospital will be the largest redevelopment project in BC's history of a hospital nature. Construction is set to begin late next year. We're hearing for the first time today from TransLink CEO since job action started last week. It comes as more C-bus sailings are canceled for tomorrow. As the CBC's Tanya Fletcher reports, there's no sign in sight for a quick resolution.
He's the face of transit and a voice not yet heard from in the labor dispute until today.
Before I get started with my prepared remarks, I do want to take a moment to talk about the ongoing labor action that we have with our Coast Mountain Bus Company and its union.
CEO Kevin Desmond was the keynote speaker at a Greater Vancouver Board of Trade event. He addressed the elephant in the room right off the bat, also extending an olive branch of sorts.
Our 3,900 bus operators are really good people. I'd like to give a round of applause for our bus drivers.
He went on to present TransLink's 30-year vision, crowned by the results of a recent survey. It showed the #1 priority for drivers, walkers, and transit users was expanding and improving the transit network.
The top, in terms of the big project ideas, interestingly enough, was expand transit to the Fraser Valley.
It was a speech headlined by talk of future transit, all while current transit negotiations are stalled. Still, he repeated this mantra to reporters afterwards.
I hope that calmer heads will prevail, that we can get back to the bargain table and negotiate a solution.
But no new talks are scheduled. The union says it's waiting for the employer to come back to the table with a new offer. It means another 14 canceled C-bus sailings tomorrow, and the overtime ban on bus maintenance will likely be felt soon as well.
Slowly but surely, the 150 spare buses that are out there are being used up. That's going to end, we think, within the next couple of days, and then you're going to actually see that they have less buses available to put on the road.
The next phase of job action would escalate to an overtime ban on bus drivers, but he says the public will be given a heads up before that happens. In the meantime, the head of the union has this message for the head of TransLink.
What he needs to do now is sit down with Coast Mountain Bus Company and look at the overall budget and figure out how they're going to address minimum breaks for drivers. Why is it that Toronto pays so much more for operators, and why is it that people in SkyTrain, also under TransLink, are paid so much more for skilled trades?
But for now, transit users are left bracing for another day of disruptions with no end in sight. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
The provincial government and Indigenous leadership kicked off their annual BC Cabinet and First Nations Leaders Gathering today. It comes after the province introduced the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples at the BC Legislature. Much of the focus of day one was on that historic bill tabled late last month. More than 900 people representing almost 200 First Nations are taking part in the talks over the next 2 days. Some Indigenous leaders say this meeting is a chance to move forward with reconciliation efforts.
Reconciliation has an exponentially higher chance of success if we do it through innovation agreement than by continuing to go to court. We all want what's best for our communities.
Leaders also say they plan to talk about an action plan on how to implement Bill 41 if it's passed. BC would be the first province in Canada to legally enshrine that UN declaration. A year has now passed since Doug McCallum became mayor of Surrey for the second time. It's been a very eventful 12 months, but he has no regrets about what he's done since taking office. Justin McElroy explains.
Doug McCallum! Remember the 2018 election campaign in Surrey? The guy who won it certainly does.
This is what we campaigned on, and we campaigned on that. We ran a very good, long campaign.
And indeed, McCallum and the Safe Surrey Coalition ran a very good campaign. Campaigning on a SkyTrain to Langley and leaving the RCMP, he returned as mayor, and the coalition won 7 of 8 seats on council. But since then, councillors Brenda Locke, Stephen Pettigrew, and Jack Hundile have all left McCallum's party, giving him just a 1-vote margin on council. The three have called him heavy-handed and stubborn. The mayor's response?
Those councillors changed their position on what they campaigned on.
To McCallum, it's a case of democratic legitimacy. If you said something during the election, you shouldn't budge.
A lot of times the press is very critical of me as far as we're doing the projects that we campaigned on. And yet the press, in a lot of times, is critical of people that say certain things at election time and don't do them.
And so the campaign agenda rolls on, pushing for more money so the SkyTrain extension doesn't stop at Fleetwood, pushing on the switch of a local police force by his promised date of April 2021, and doing whatever he can to stop ride-hailing and cannabis outlets in Surrey. Because, if you missed it...
We've said very clearly in the campaign, and again, we got elected on the basis that we're going to put a moratorium in.
McCallum says other priorities for the next 3 years are density along transit lines and protecting the environment. But it's clear that pushing through what he promised in the last campaign will guide him for the next campaign, where it's likely some of the people that broke away will run against him.
If you campaign strongly on something, and then as soon as you get elected, you change your position, I think the public will certainly recognize that, and the public will be the ones to deal with it in the next election.
One way or another, they certainly will. Justin McElroy, CBC News, Surrey.
Pigeons are no longer welcome in North Vancouver. The district voted 4-2 last night to ban the birds in backyards, overturning a bylaw that had been around since 1971. But as we told you yesterday, only one person owned pet pigeons in the whole district. Kulwant DeLay has lived there for 25 years, but moved to the Lynn Valley area 3 years ago. His new neighbor, Betty Forbes, didn't like his birds in their coop, which she called an eyesore. She complained before and after she became a council member. Forbes recused herself from the vote last night, but district staff say she was the only person who ever complained. Backyard chicken coops are still allowed. Well, a bold and brazen and hefty theft hit a Granville Street art gallery this week, and it took less than 3 minutes. Have a peek. The thief stole a 160-kilogram bronze abstract statue of a horse and rider on display outside the doorway of the Petley Jones Gallery. Security video captured a white man wheeling a dolly to the front there, to the steps early yesterday morning. He disappears for a few minutes, then reappears dragging the meter-tall piece down the stairs, loading it onto the dolly, and then just rolling it away. A statue by local artist Fari Alden has been on display there for almost 2 years. It's valued at $24,000. The founder and CEO of Vancouver-based Hootsuite is stepping down. In a letter to investors, Ryan Holmes today said becoming a first-time father has prompted a lot of reflection. Holmes founded Hootsuite in 2008 with a handful of employees. It's since grown to about 1,000 workers. He's going to become the new executive chairman of the board once a new CEO is in place. In April, the company went through a round of layoffs, rumored to be about 100 workers. A Vancouver Island man is fighting for his life in hospital after he became trapped under an ATV for almost a week near Port Alice. 41-year-old father of 3, Andrew Horsley, was found on October 22nd by a man out for a drive with his daughter. His mother says he may have been out there for 7 or 8 days, pinned under the machine in a ditch with no helmet on. He said 6 brain bleeds and had to have a left leg amputated. But his mother says even he's surprised his doctors.
They're astonished and wowed, and they can't believe, and they say he's a fighter, don't give up. And I'm saying nobody's going to give up.
Horsley is still on life support and has critical injuries. Britt Soderholm is here with our first check of the weather. It was another dry, sunny day with a mist. No variety whatsoever.
Are you bored yet?
No.
Me neither. Honestly,
Okay,
this can just keep on going. And really, it is going to be continuing, at least for the next 24 hours. But I was hinting at this a little bit earlier in the week. We are going to be going through a bit of a change up here into our weather pattern. But really, foggy start to the morning and then clearing throughout the day. That's our general trend. This is a live look at our satellite imagery. The morning, of course, today, a little bit cloudy, a little bit foggy. By the afternoon, it did start to clear up. And right now, some of the clearest skies of the day, in fact. With that, our temperatures very spot on seasonal, 8 and 7 degrees all across the lower mainland and a little bit warmer over toward Victoria. Vancouver today getting up to about 10 degrees. And as I said, that is seasonal and that is where we should be. For the remainder of the overnight, or rather the overnight as it is, I keep saying that, the overnight period tonight into tomorrow, we're going to be seeing temperatures, of course, be a little bit cooler toward Richmond, Surrey, and New West, down into the mid-single digits. Closer to the downtown core, however, it's going to be a little bit more moderated, so temperatures anywhere between 6 and 7 degrees. You can definitely be expecting a few clouds throughout the overnight. But tomorrow, as a general trend, temperatures right around 11, 12 degrees. I wouldn't be surprised to see some places actually get into the low teens. Once again, probably expecting more sun than cloud by the afternoon. But if you wake up tomorrow morning and you notice the fog still lingering, you notice some clouds, don't lose hope. It is going to be going away. Just give it a little bit of time for the sun to do its magic.
Some very good advice. Thank you, Britt.
You're welcome.
Just a reminder, you can watch this newscast live on CBC Gem. The free app is also where you can find our other CBC programs. And CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Panic buttons and extra security. Some BC MPs say rising online abuse is prompting them to tighten up protections for themselves and their staff. That's next. Good evening. Thanks for joining us online, where we are commercial-free. Tonight, we're introducing you to a very special 4-year-old. Tylo Wires is undergoing chemotherapy to treat leukemia. During an appointment, she wore a Rapunzel costume, and her mom noticed it made her feel brave. So the family started a collection of outfits they now share with other sick children.
This is so poofy. Poofy. Step on in. She was diagnosed with leukemia at the end of July. And lift it up. Choop, choop, choop. There we go. We were actually leaving for an appointment that she had, and out of routine, she just grabbed the hairbrush and started brushing her head, which was so sad. And I realized that I needed to change the focus on what she had lost and change the dynamics of her hospital experience. And so we came up with the idea of just getting her a costume. Isn't that beautiful? We're gonna go over to the elevator. Do you remember where that is?
Yep, I know.
I think it's this way. When we walked onto that unit, it was like she was a different person. She had so much boldness and so much bravery. It was incredible. She was so filled with joy, and it really was contagious. It was really, really great. The procedures that normally would cause her to cry didn't this time. And she was so proud of her. She said, "I'm just so brave, Mommy." And it was just a different perspective for her, a different way to look at what treatment had to be like, what hospital visits had to be like, and it changed everything.
How's it going? Good. Love your crown, it's so pretty.
Because everything turned out so well with the first costume, I thought, you know, I should make a theme out of it and have costumes for her next visits. And so I thought, you know, I'll put a post on a buy and sell, see if I can get a couple more for the next ones. And I did, and now I have 76 costumes. The website is designed for anybody that wants to take part in this idea that's now coming forth. You know, we want to be able to make it easy for people to make donations, whether it's through costumes or PayPal or even the simplest things like people that are wanting to do dry cleaning or anything, you know, just to make it easy for people to contribute.
And wipes.
That looks delicious. I want people to understand, like Tylo discovered, that there is a strength and there is a boldness on the inside of them that can come out. And with so many dresses and costumes coming in, I would love to just expand it. You know, there's so many kids, boys, girls, you know, all different ages, that if they could get any of the experience that Tylo got out of it, then that is now my focus.
Stay with us. We're back in just a few moments with the latest headlines from across our country. Some MPs say the volume and intensity of online abuse they face is rising. And it's not just politicians. It's their staff as well. Without specialized training or mandatory safety measures, individual MPs have had to come up with their own ways to make employees feel safe. As Ashley Burke reports, MPs and staff from here in BC are on the front lines.
Part of Gabriel Yu's daily routine is going through his boss's mail. More and more, there's hate mail and hate messages that sound like this.
You want to bring in sick people into the country? Well, it's you who's sick, Kwan. You suck.
Kwan is MP Jenny Kwan, a woman, a visible minority, and the NDP's immigration critic. The hate aimed at her and her staff is relentless. Racism, misogyny, and threats. It festers online and can spill into the real world with angry calls and visits to their office.
Some of our staff felt intimidated and worried about our own safety.
That worry forced Kwan to dip into her budget to make staff feel safe.
We have a panic button, for example, in our office. And so if at any point in time where people are feeling threatened or unsafe, you can actually press the panic button and then help would arrive.
We took action on our own.
With Elizabeth May, it escalated to death threats. She hired a private security consultant to assess her office.
People feel, and including staff, can feel under threat when the MP for whom they work is under threat.
It's exhausting, it's heartbreaking.
May's chief of staff says employees don't have the training they need to deal with the onslaught of hate.
It's very difficult for people. It takes a lot of energy in order to be able to handle the assaults and the insults.
It's an issue in the ridings they're trying to solve here. A committee of MPs is looking for answers.
More needs to be done, and that's some of the things we're looking at, both in terms of is there additional security measures that we can take, how do we deal with remote offices where maybe only one person is working in that office.
The first step is a reporting system for harassment on the job that rolled out in the past year. But that only alerts a problem after the fact. It doesn't give MPs what they need to deal with hate when it first walks through their office door. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
China has quietly resumed importing Canadian beef and pork. The move comes after nearly 4 months of suspended trade. This is a relief for Canadian producers, but as Salima Shivji reports, observers caution there are still challenges in the relationship between the two countries.
At one of Canada's biggest agricultural fairs, it was welcome news.
Over 70% of our hogs are exported. If we lose an export market, it causes disaster in the price. So this is fabulous news, fabulous news.
Everybody will be celebrating tonight, I'm sure. Yeah, wonderful.
It's been more than 4 months since Beijing blocked all Canadian pork and meat imports, the latest in a string of moves that ramped up tensions between the two countries, after authorities here, acting on an American request,
detained Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. 4 months of major losses for the meat industry.
We're looking at between 300 and 400 million so far over the last 4 months. So it's a significant amount.
The Prime Minister hinting today at how it happened, the result of much work behind the scenes to convince Chinese authorities Canada's pork was safe, giving thanks to a new ambassador with strong business ties in China. The shift comes as China's president toured a Shanghai trade event and touted cooperation to resolve global disputes. But lifting the ban is perhaps more about desperation than anything else. China's pig population has been hit hard by swine flu, and with New Year celebrations looming, China needs Canadian pork.
I think the PM has commented about it. It's a positive step.
Except canola farmers are still stuck in the middle of the diplomatic dispute, and 2 Canadians remain detained in retaliation for Meng's arrest.
You have to think also in terms of the Chinese culture, and President Xi Jinping doesn't want to lose face. They have been very clear. We have to return Mrs. Meng before things can return to normal.
And so not necessarily a thaw in relations, but politically helpful nonetheless for Justin Trudeau. Good optics as he retools his cabinet in a minority situation where the West needs careful consideration. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Ottawa.
Immediate action. Scientists across the globe band together to plead with governments to tackle climate change fast. We'll tell you what some communities in Canada are doing after this. Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
And a new era of development on First Nations land.
The Squamish Nation has a huge plan for new housing on a prime piece of land it owns in Vancouver. It's looking at building 11 towers with up to 6,000 suites right near the Burrard Street Bridge. It doesn't need the city's approval, but the nation says it will reach out to neighbors.
Hope that calmer heads will prevail, that we can get back to the bargain table and negotiate.
But TransLink's boss may be waiting a while amid the ongoing labor dispute. No new talks between unionized bus drivers and their employers have been scheduled. More C-bus sailings are set to be canceled tomorrow.
My house is going to be on TV.
And you may be hearing less of these in a few years. Vancouver City Council has voted to ban the sale and use of fireworks by 2021. It's now up to staff to figure out how to do that. Scientists from around the world have now signed a declaration they hope will spur governments to take immediate, meaningful steps against climate change. It's a call to action published today in the journal Bioscience, signed by 11,000 scientists from 153 countries. They say greenhouse gas emissions are still rising and that current efforts to reduce them are simply not enough. The climate crisis is, quote, accelerating faster than many scientists predicted, and it's caused more damage than many had feared. The scientists say they had to come forward because climate change is threatening ecosystems and the fate of humanity. In the town of Berwick, Nova Scotia, people are so concerned about the climate, they've declared their own emergency. The CBC's Kayla Hounsell explains the changes happening there to help the cause.
When did you install this?
About a month ago. And our furnace has not run since they were installed. We haven't burned oil in a month.
Heat pumps are just phase one of John Rainforth's plan to make his 70-year-old home more energy efficient.
My south roof is going to be covered in solar panels. And then in the basement, I will have 2 energy storage units.
Focusing on clean energy is one of the things that the scientists are calling for. And here in Berwick, it's not just individuals acting, it's the town too.
People can borrow money through the town, make the changes to their properties now, and those changes result in returns on that investment over the years.
Berwick has a hydroelectric dam and a wind farm. An estimated 60% of its power already comes from renewable sources. Still, Council felt compelled to declare its own state of climate emergency.
It's more than just a nice thing to do, it's something that we really have to do.
That sense of urgency shared by the signatories on today's declaration.
And I actually received the invitation directly from a colleague who said, you should sign this. You know, we should all sign this.
Kate Sharon is not a climate scientist, but a social scientist. She's encouraged by the fact the climate conversation is broadening to wider scientific disciplines and says that word, emergency, is important.
Whenever there's an emergency, if there's a massive storm, people work together, they change their lifestyles, they do remarkable things.
And we think our floors are going to be far warmer.
John Rainforth says today's declaration is important.
We knew this 20 years ago, and yet it took getting close to the edge of the precipice for countries and individuals to really act knowledgeably about it.
But he says his town is an example to the world that everyone has to take part in mitigating the impact of climate change. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Berwick, Nova Scotia.
At 6:33 on this Tuesday, there's a live shot of a glowing green science world and a bit of BC Place. Brett will be here after the break for your full provincial weather picture as we dive deeper into November. Stick around.
CBC Vancouver is proud to be hosting Indigenous Junior J School November 13th. We've invited Indigenous students from across the Lower Mainland to come and learn all about a career in journalism. For more information, head to cbc.ca/bc.
People in India's capital may see a slight improvement in the toxic smog that has shrouded their city for days now.
Certainly when we arrived yesterday, we could taste it and you could see it. But today, though, is so much different.
The air quality remains at a hazardous level, but winds have blown away some of the dust and pollution hanging over Delhi. The city recently declared a public health emergency. Schools were closed yesterday and today, and the odd-even rule is in place for drivers. Private vehicles with odd-numbered plates are only allowed to drive on odd-numbered days, even plates on the even days. Meteorologist Brett Soderholm is here. Very different picture for us. That is terrifying.
It's very scary, and I mean, we should be celebrating some small improvements here, but to go from extremely bad to now slightly less bad is still a dangerous situation. So hoping that these conditions do improve continually over the next little while. But over here, completely different story. We've just been locked into these stretches of fog and not much really going on, and that trend is going to be continuing at least for the next 24 hours or so. And this morning, if you didn't get up in time, I want to show you what it looked like to see this morning's, well, supposedly a sunrise, you could say. There's a lot of cloud in the picture here because that was the way the day started, transitioned to being that more so into the afternoon. In fact, gave me a little bit of a fright. I was a bit worried that my forecast for sun coming out this afternoon was not going to pan out, but very fortunately, right about 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it did, and that trend I think is going to continue for tomorrow. I talked about this a bit before. It is an unusual dry spell here. The last day that we've had any noticeable rain in Vancouver was on October 25th, so if you include today, that would be 11 consecutive days without rain. I was doing some digging, and here's the interesting thing about this. If you look at a previous dry spell that would occur between October and November, the record was set back in 1954 for 12 days. So if we get through tomorrow without any rain, we are going to be tying this record from way back into the mid-50s. So that gives you a scale of essentially how unusual these dry conditions are. And this has all, of course, been thanks to this area of high pressure well situated over the southern half of BC that is going to be moving around stateside. And that's going to allow all of this rain to be falling now onto the province of BC, translated, of course, to snow, where it is much colder, far to the north. But the models are still not exactly in agreement as to when this rain is going to be coming. Presently, it looks that by Saturday morning, we could be experiencing a few showers across the Lower Mainland, off and on throughout the day, but then largely, it looks like the heaviest rain at this point in time is not going to be falling until Sunday. Now, of course, this isn't great in terms of timing for our weekend forecast, but that is how it's going to be going. As we've talked about already, seen almost 2 full weeks of no rain. Now, in terms of the overall totals here, we're talking about anywhere between 10 and 20 millimeters of rain all across much of the Metro Vancouver region, including the Fraser Valley. And overall, temperatures are going to be very close to seasonal. So still looking at temperatures anywhere between 12 and 11 degrees or so, and then a little bit of cloud to end off the week. But as I mentioned, likely keeping an eye on what we could be dealing with for our rain for this weekend, with showers expected on both days.
Okay, thanks very much, Brett.
You're welcome.
A horrifying attack in Mexico leaves children and women dead. What's behind these killings? After this.
I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Join Leanne Young as she moderates the next UBC Dialogue series, Is It Time to Wave the Flag? A discussion on what needs to be done to build a more inclusive society in Canada. And get your tickets today to Corleone's moving Remembrance Day concert, Protect Us from War. Get your tickets and learn more at corleone.org. For more on these events, check us out online.
Mexican authorities are investigating a grisly attack near the country's northern border. Gunmen slaughtered 6 children and 3 women traveling in several SUVs. As the CBC's Arthi Pohl reports, the ambush scene stretched for miles and was littered with spent shell casings.
He can barely breathe. A relative circles the burned-out vehicle riddled with bullet holes. The SUV was one of 3 carrying his family members.
This is for the record. Anita and 4 of my grandchildren are burnt and shot up.
3 women and 6 children, including 8-month-old twins, were killed. They were members of a breakaway Mormon community that settled in northern Mexico decades ago.
I think a lot of us are just speechless. It's horrific, and we just can't believe that this actually happened to our family. It just seems like a bad dream.
Alfonso.
Mexican officials say gunmen may have mistaken the large SUVs for the vehicles of rival gangs. It's happened before.
We're still trying to get more of the details on what happened.
Donald Trump offered to help Mexico, tweeting, "This is the time for Mexico, with the help of the United States, to wage war on the drug cartels and wipe them off the face of the earth." Mexican authorities are grappling with extreme violence in the region. Last year, Mexico saw 33,000 homicides, and 2019 is on course to break that record.
It's not just got caught in gunfire in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is a whole new level of cartel violence.
At least 8 children survived the attack. One relative says a boy managed to escape and went looking for help after hiding his injured siblings in bushes so they would be unharmed. Several were taken to U.S. hospitals for treatment. They face a long road of physical and mental recovery. The memory of their horrific loss still raw. Arthi Pohl, CBC News, Washington.
Indigenous activists from Brazil say countries that import goods made from the exploitation of the Amazon rainforest share responsibility for its destruction. The activists turned up at a Greenpeace protest today in Belgium.
We are calling on the European Commission to propose new legislation that would make sure that products that are sold on the European markets are not linked with human rights violations or forest destruction around the world.
Logging in the rainforest region has been on the rise since Brazil's president took office this year, vowing to open up protected indigenous land to economic development. That's led to violent clashes between pro-mining and forestry industry and indigenous residents. One indigenous defender of the forest was killed earlier this month by illegal loggers. The activists say recent wildfires in the Amazon are the work of criminal groups bent on boosting exports to Europe and other nations. 259 emaciated, battered people have been freed from captivity in a raid on a purported Islamic center in southwestern Nigeria.
We eat 1 meal a day. If you see what you eat, bro, even though if you give your dog at home, your dog can't eat it. That's what we manage here.
The discovery came in the latest sweep by Nigerian police on religious institutions that position themselves as education and reform centers. Instead, the mostly teen or young men are chained up, physically and sexually abused, and then starved. More than 1,000 people have been rescued in recent weeks. An infant was also found among the captives in today's raid. 9 people, including the facility owner, have been arrested. Back in Canada now, where Winnipeg has just logged its 40th homicide of 2019. It seems on track to set a grisly new record. The CBC's Cameron McIntosh shows us a city crying out for help.
Behind that fluttering yellow tape, this morning, Winnipeg police began combing through another homicide scene. At the same time, the city's mayor was sending a letter to the Premier and Prime Minister asking to meet face to face.
What we're acknowledging here is we need help.
Mayor Brian Bowman says Winnipeg is facing a violent crime crisis. senior governments need to step up.
So much of what we're dealing with right now stem from a greater need in our community to better combat mental health, addictions, and families in crisis.
At 40, Winnipeg currently stands one short of its all-time annual homicide record. It's still early November. 11 of those homicides were committed in the last 30 days, including the stabbing deaths of a teen girl and 3-year-old Hunter Straight Smith, attacked in his sleep.
This is unprecedented for us as a police service, as a city.
Winnipeg police say there's no common thread to explain it all.
We haven't seen an underlying theme in those homicides, that there are elements of domestic homicides, random acts of violence that are related to nothing that we can see. Robberies gone bad, methamphetamine, underlying elements of drug culture, as well as gangs.
Whether the city has actually become less safe overall is debatable. But scenes like this weekend's vigil for that 3-year-old boy are building a sense of urgency.
We had a beautiful, heartfelt, heart-wrenching vigil for baby Hunter, and none of our leaders were there.
Manitoba's premier is already set to meet with the Prime Minister on Friday. He says crime is on the agenda, but stops short of calling this a crisis.
I agree with getting results for Manitobans, and safer streets are what Manitobans who abide by the laws of our province deserve to have.
No matter who's meeting, the reality here is reducing violent crime in this city will take more than just talking about it. Right now, no one has a proven plan. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Future law enforcement officers on PEI are getting a different kind of training. The Atlantic Police Academy wants its students to understand what people living with mental illness deal with. As Sarah McMillan reports, the de-escalation training is designed to help increase empathy when dealing with tough situations.
These students have a simple task to complete. With Monopoly money in hand and a short shopping list, they're sent into this makeshift convenience store. Their instructor plays the role of the cashier.
Sometimes they come into the village thinking, oh, I can do this, no problem. And they're actually quite shocked how difficult it is.
That's because these students are getting an idea of what it's like to experience an auditory hallucination. Through their headphones, they're hearing layers of sound, from background noise to insults to whispers.
Stop it now.
Hadfield has been leading this training for all students at the Academy for about 5 years. That includes the police officer program, conservation, corrections, and this program for future sheriffs.
Calls that are involved in policing in itself, 60% are of people that have mental health issues. So the numbers are staggering.
They've been learning about mental illness in class and strategies like speaking slowly and clearly and giving people space. But Hadfield wants them to have a deeper understanding.
We can tell cadets over the training what to do in an interaction with somebody who's having a psychotic break, but it's very difficult for them to empathize. So when we tell them to slow down their speak, to repeat, then they understand why.
There are lots of blank stares, jumbled answers, and these students say a real feeling of stress just in this brief scenario.
It was almost like I was skiing down a hill and I had no idea how to ski. And then you think, like, we only did that for, I think it was 5 minutes, but that to me felt like 2 hours I was in there for, and I would not want to wake up every day and have to hear those voices in my head.
I didn't hear her when she asked about the weather, because I was facing the other way and I was focused on the items and the voices.
Hadfield hopes they'll remember that feeling when dealing with people on the job. And she hopes training like this will catch on more and more elsewhere in the country. Sarah McMillan, CBC News, Summerside.
Disney fans, rejoice! A box office smash is getting a sequel. Can they recreate the cold magic? We'll tell you after the break.
Wednesday on the early edition, while a majority of British Columbians surveyed say they'd like to move to year-round daylight saving time, now some people are calling for the adoption of year-round standard time. We'll hear about that tomorrow on the early edition.
The city of Montreal is bidding adieu to some of its old subway cars.
But rather than heading to the dump, some of them are going to be getting reborn with a different task than they may be used to.
Simon Nakanichny takes us inside a school that's pulled a bit of an engineering feat with their reuse.
If there was a heaven for old metro cars, this would be the place.
A lot of engineers from Polytechnic worked on this particular car. So to save it and to bring it back to its kind of original place where so many people learned before was kind of bringing back home in a way.
But how do you get a 17-meter long, 13-ton hunk of metal into the middle of an already built building? It was an engineering challenge fit for, well, engineers. Bravery Berger and 17 fellow students had to remove this bank of windows, then slide the car inside with a crane.
So much joy. We were so excited when it was finally in.
But this icon from the 1960s isn't just eye candy. The car is a kind of refuge, a place for the budding engineers to unwind. There will be activities like pet therapy and campaigns to help students moderate their screen time.
It's a comfy place to come. There's a bit of echo here, so I'm not sure it will be the most relaxing place ever, but I think, yes, if there's some activities, I guess some people can come, yeah.
I mean, I think it's a good idea. There's not any other really spot to do that in, and I know they've been doing that in the libraries during like finals and stuff.
Give you a lot of information. Bernard Saucier drove metro cars for 35 years, including this very one. He says it's the perfect end for this blue beauty.
It's great, and it's one of the best environment I saw.
After decades of service, this train has finally reached the end of the line. But in retirement, it will continue to help people, not to speed up their lives, but to slow them down. Simon Nakanichny, CBC News, Montreal.
Merci d'avoir été des nôtres à bord de la station Polytechnique Alstom. N'oubliez pas vos effets personnels.
Cool.
Yeah, see, that's awesome. That brings back some fond memories for me. Having lived in Montreal, I would take those cars pretty well every day for about 5 to 6 years. So to see them have a new life, I'm pretty about
I'd leave it to the engineering students to figure this out. It's probably going to become a bar, but that's fine too.
It's very possible.
Yes, indeed.
All right, well, if you find massive success once, well, why let it go?
That's certainly true with Disney as it tries to recreate the box office magic of Frozen with, shocking, a sequel. The first movie made more than $1.3 billion worldwide.
Yeah, that is a lot of money. And last night, the stars of Frozen 2 came out for a major promotional event in Toronto ahead of its big premiere. And our very own film critic, Eli Glasner, was there.
We just have to survive this blizzard!
That's no blizzard!
Sorcery.
That's my sister!
That would have been nice to know.
$1.3 billion US. That is how much money the first movie, Frozen, raked in globally, making that animated film the biggest animated film of all time. So the question is, can Disney do it again with the sequel, Frozen 2? Well, they seem to be big believers because they brought to Toronto the voices behind Elsa, Anna, and the snowman, Olaf. So that's right, all the talent here in Toronto for this blue carpet event. Not the premiere, just get a little taste, a little teaser of the sequel to come. Now, we had a chance to catch up with Anna herself, Kristen Bell, who thinks they have a winning recipe for a new story.
Having the ability to do a second one was really cool. Everyone else felt the pressure. Yeah. I did not, perhaps because one thing I share with Anna is eternal optimism. I'm a firm believer that if you make a cake and you use those same ingredients the next night, chances are it's also going to be a great cake. You know what I mean? So what we did with this movie was we matured it a little bit for this audience.
Idina Menzel plays Elsa in the sequel and was telling us that in the new story, her character does let go a little more, but the question is, does she have another anthem, another song that becomes that kind of a fantastic earworm? Well, she was telling us that there are new songs on the way, different, but perhaps just as special.
I have two wonderful songs that I think are emotional and passionate and
wonderfully written and that tell Elsa's story in a way that no one else could, like the Lopez's.
And Canadians can see if the sequel competes with the original when it opens in Canada November 21st. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
That will be super for all sorts of people.
Yeah, I mean, I might be a little bit more enthusiastic about seeing that new Terminator movie that was reviewed last week.
You think?
Yeah, this might not be my
That's
core
okay.
demographic.
At least there'll be an annoying song.
We'll
a new one.
We're going to hear all about it, I think, for a long time.
That's right. Don't get any ideas, kids.
No.
You can always find our news program online at cbc.ca/BC. Our next local news is right here at 11 o'clock with us.
We'll be back
after the National. Good night.
Have a good one.